Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast Magic is Real, where I, Shannon, interview near death experiencers and people who've had spiritually transformative experiences, healers, and we talk about all things metaphysical and spiritual. One thing I'm just going to ask before we get rolling is if you like the podcast, would you do me a big favor? It's actually a little favor. All you have to do is make sure you're subscribed. Please like the video and leave a comment, even if it's just a little heart. It really helps the algorithm and really helps the podcast grow. And it's a way you can support the podcast for free. So I just have to say that. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I have with me Wayne Morrison joining me from Florida. And Wayne is a lovely person and also a near death experiencer who had his near death experience a while ago,
A
a
little
year
bit.
before I was born. And he's here to share that story and his insights with us. But first, I'd like to say, well, first of all, welcome, Wayne. It's so good to
Thank you.
have you
Nice to meet
here.
you.
So nice to meet you too. And I would just love to know about you. And you had your NDE at 17. So pretty young in life, early on in life. But I'd
Yes.
love to know about your background and what your life was like before this. Were you religious? Were you spiritual? Were you not spiritual? Anything you like to share as it pertains to your life and spiritual journey?
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I I was a non-religious person. My mother was a single mother, essentially, and she raised six of us. And I never did really ask her why she didn't raise us in a religion, but either deliberately or otherwise, she chose not to, which I think was fortuitous as I look at it in hindsight, because I didn't have any predisposition when I had the NDE. I was a fairly uh, introverted kid. I that all changed after the age of 17, but I was very introverted and very quiet. I was so shy I couldn't even look people in the eyes.
That was me.
Yeah, and that again, I was a high school dropout at that time. I was 17 years old, pretty much lost. I had a girlfriend who is now my wife. We've been married for 51 years, believe it or not.
Wow, beautiful.
She was my girlfriend at the time, and I had gone to a party. I'm from Newport, Rhode Island originally, and Newport was a very heavy Navy town then, still is somewhat, but it was very, very heavy Navy town. And some sailors had invited me to a party. And when you're 17 and somebody's 20, 21, that's a big age difference, I think. I had gone there and I had taken some medication. I can't remember what or why I was even sick, if it was like a flu or a cold, but I was drinking, and I wasn't really a drinker either. I was just a kid who didn't do any of that stuff, but I was drinking. And this is the part where I just have to be honest, because I'm never going to lie to anybody. I was at this party and I don't know what happened next. All I know is I was at the party, and the next moment, everything changed. And what happened is I had heard a very deep, deep rumbling, like it was vibrating through my body, and I could see I was in darkness. Both of those things sound terrifying, but it was the opposite. I felt very calm. And I had this idea going in my head that I am going to learn the secret meaning of life.
Mm.
Yeah, it was sort of fantastical, but it seemed natural too. I began to move very rapidly. And at some point, I guess I became aware I didn't have a body, but it didn't seem to be a big deal. I was present, I was there, and I was moving very rapidly. I know we've come to call it a tunnel. I'm not sure I originally thought of it that way, but it could be a tunnel because I was moving forward, and up in front of me was a bright light, but it was way off in the distance. And as I came through this, we'll call it a tunnel because that's what everyone calls it. As I came out of the tunnel, I was moving still very rapidly above valleys and fields and streams, and there were these huge flowers. And I wasn't a kid who was into flowers, but these were like enormous. And I tried to recollect. I don't know. There was no way for me to measure them, but they could have been 50 feet. They could have been 100 feet big, some of them. And they were all making this wonderful music that was somehow, I understood, they were supporting me in in physical terms and in what I would now call spiritual terms. At that time, I wouldn't have said that, but I felt I felt peaceful. And as I moved over these flowers, I came to see three beings to my right. They were very tall, and I know at least one of them was feminine. And the other two may have been male, or I'm not sure what the mix was. I couldn't see their features. Their features were indistinct, but they were wrapped in light. It seemed to emanate from them. In fact, everything in this place was emanating light, everything. The colors were spectacular, like colors you can't see in the world. But the light was in everything, and it was all around. And these three beings let me know that I was about to meet a being of the very highest order. Again, these aren't words, and I'm sure you've heard this described because of what you do. Some people call it telepathy, but I wouldn't call it that, because as soon as I thought something, before the thought could even formulate, I not only understood what it was I was going to ask, it was not only shown to me, but I became it. And I always use this as an example. If I said, what is it like to be a drop of water? I would become the drop of water. I would become a cloud that would drop the water. I would be in the ocean, part of the ocean. And then I'd be, literally part of the fish, the sea. It would all interconnect. And it all felt, I know this sounds bizarre to some people, but it all felt completely natural. And they said, you're going to meet this being. They communicated that you're going to meet this being of this highest order. And that little light I had seen way off in the distance, all while this is transpiring, was getting closer. And it came very, very close, but it's above me, and it was radiating this brilliant white light. And it just enveloped everything, the beings, the place I was at, myself. And I understood that I knew I was home. I knew I was where I belonged. And this being allowed me to ask questions, and I asked them rapidly. And the two I remember the most were, as a kid, I was always infatuated with UFOs. And I asked if there were other forms of life in the universe. And before I could even get that thought out, I was transported so fast through dark space. And I was looking down on worlds. Two of them I particularly remember. One seemed to have ancient beings with ancient garb, what I would call like Roman or Egyptian type of garb. And the other one seemed more modern in terms of clothing and buildings. Everything I saw, unfortunately, maybe I could have said, could I get down closer and like see what's going on? But I didn't. I was just so overwhelmed with the idea that they really existed. And so we go back to this area where the three beings were, and I continued asking questions. And this great being, it never said a name, and I didn't attribute a name to the great being. But the being was sharing my joy and kind of laughing as if almost like I was a child. Well, I was a child, I was only 17, but I mean, like an infant. And it was apparent that everything I was doing brought him, and again, I think I said this, it was a male presence. Non-distinct features again, but very, very large and very brilliant. And I said, I really want to know the secret meaning of life. And excuse me. And at that moment, I was filled with the comprehension, the understanding, the experience of love. And it's always sounded so petty when I try to describe this, because here in the world, I mean, we have love songs, we have love poems, we say we love each other, but this love was something far, far bigger, far more burning, far more, and it wasn't, again, there were no words, so it wasn't LOVE, it was just this huge comprehension and connection to this burning love that I could tell was firing everything that I was seeing. I was part of all of it, and I was so overjoyed that I guess I'll call it my spirit presence because I didn't really have a word for it. I knew I was there. I could feel myself like doing flips through the air because I, and this being was laughing out loud, in joy. And I was feeling the connection with the being, and it was all really wonderful. And, I knew I was home. I wasn't going to leave. And at a certain point, I was brought, and I'm not quite clear if the great being was there or not. I feel that he probably was, it was, but the others were. And I was brought into this dark expanse that was, honestly, if you looked at like a science fiction movie, dark space, it was like this. And again, it didn't seem frightening at all. It seemed natural. And I understood I was about to see something. And in front of me appeared this huge tablet. And since tablets have a different meaning nowadays, I'm talking about the tablet that, is giant stone tablet. How big, I don't know. It was enormous. And it was spinning and it stopped in front of me. And I looked at it and I saw the creation and the life of the world. And I saw this in, I guess, milliseconds. I could see the world being created. I understood I was connected to all this too. I understood there was no separation. Exactly how, I don't recall. I don't know what that really means, except that I know it happened, that I felt it. And all these, jungles and all these violent eruptions and these. I always remember the armies clashing. That was so vivid. I could just see these armies coming up against each other, and it was just civilizations and destruction. They would come up, they would either crumble away or be overtaken by other armies. And I presumably was shown the end of the world. I do not know what the end of the world was. I didn't bring it back with me. I don't know why that was. I assume that wouldn't be good news to give to anybody. That's just my assumption. I
Yeah.
don't know, I would rather not know myself. But I assume I was shown that. At any rate, I had made my mind up that I was going to stay there. I wasn't going to leave. And it was communicated to me that I had to go back. And I made it clear. And again, I don't know how I did that, but I wasn't leaving. I was staying. And they communicated that there were important reasons that I had to return. And I, still wasn't going to cooperate. And then these beings surrounded me. Excuse me. These beings of light. And I've never really been clear on the number, if it was hundreds or thousands. It was so many of them. And they were very tall and they were brilliant. And they were all singing in this beautiful harmony, this beautiful voices. And it was improvisational. It was being created in that time on the spot. But it was like a music I've never been able to hear before or since. And I understood they were singing my praises, literally. I know it sounds egoic, but that's honestly what happened. They were singing my praises. And the next thing I know, I'm back into this apartment. I'm 17. And I was in a bathroom and I was looking for a razor blade. I had a razor blade. And I really always want to be really clear here.
Yeah.
I was only 17. I was not filled with despair. It was the exact opposite. And I somehow understood that if I ended my life, or I believed, I should say, that I would go back there. Looking back on it, I don't think I would have. I think I would have probably done myself and a whole lot of people a huge disservice by killing myself. But at that moment, all I could think of was to return to that place. And a voice, this is the only thing I pointed out that has ever been overtly mystical in my life. This one single thing. I've had a lot of experiences that I find mystical, but this one was clearly a deep, resonant male voice said, no. And I dropped the razor blade. And at that moment, one of these sailors opened the door and said, hey, he's in here, guys. So they were looking for me. So how I ended up there or what had happened to me, I've never been clear. So that was pretty much it. I went back home and I found my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I explained to her the next day what had happened, and she believed me, which I'm not sure I would have if I were her. I would have said, "Okay, you're using drugs, or you're crazy." But I had no context. It was 1972, and so everything that happened to me, there was no way for me to. I read a lot, but I had no way of knowing. There was no context. So it's 1973. I joined the military. My wife's pregnant. We're married. I joined the Air Force, and I'm in Denver, Colorado. And I believe it was 73 or 4. It was not very long after the incident, 2 years at most. And I was watching a TV show on a daytime TV show. Back then, they were a big thing. And he said, "I'm bringing out Dr. Raymond Moody. He has written a book called Life After Life." Didn't really mean anything to me, but I'm just watching TV. And this doctor comes out and begins to read these excerpts from the book. And I'm going, "What?" And my wife and I look at each other, and I jump up. I go, it's happened to other people, because just, I never thought I was crazy. I knew I wasn't. But just to find out that I wasn't the only one isolated, in one incident. And of course, now, I mean, look, the internet, everything. But back then, there was really no reference. So as soon as I could, probably as soon as I could have afforded to at that point, I ran out and bought the book. And I read it cover to cover. And yeah, it was all what happened to me. And with everything, every time I've read one of these, or now heard them on the internet, there are always some differences, always, but there are always these things that are so much the same 99% of the time, that I almost, I know when people are telling the truth, because they're trying to communicate something that can't be communicated, and it almost befuddles them, because it's hard to do this in this world. But I did 8 years in the Air Force. We went to the Philippines. At the end of the Air Force term, it was a funny thing that happened to me. I was a very, I was not a kid who would ever have wanted to be a police officer. That was never going to happen in my life. But because it was the Vietnam era, Vietnam was closing down. I did not go to Vietnam, but they said, "Get over there, you're a cop." And I said, "No, no, sir, get over there, shut up." So that was it. They made me a cop. And what I found out, and I did not know, was that they were humans, cops. I had this naive and immature idea that cops were not people. They weren't good people. And of course, there's some that aren't, just like there's not good doctors or plumbers. But most of them were great men and women. I said, I could do this job. So when I got out, I ended up joining the Newport Police Department in Rhode Island, and I went through the ranks. I was a detective, a sergeant, a lieutenant, and I retired as captain of detectives. And in that time span, a lot of other things happened. I had 2 children, 2 daughters. Well, we had a stillborn son, but we had 2 daughters who survived. And I better get this right. We have 7 grandkids and 1 great grandson. And I also became a musician and played in bands and played solo. And I did that for a lot of years, 20 odd years, 30 years. And I did it in conjunction with being a cop, which was very unheard of at the time. The cops thought it was really different. And when I would be playing music in a bar, if somebody should ask what my day job was, and I told them, especially at there was a certain point where I had long hair and a beard because I was an undercover officer. This would have been in the 80s, so 82, mid 80s, late 80s. So there was a lot of this. Yeah, I've never met a good cop, and I would say, "Well, how many have you met?" "Well, none. You're the first one." I go, "Well, that explains a few things." But anyway, I retired. My wife was a director of tourism. She was the vice president of tourism in Newport. She retired. We've had great lives. We've been very fortunate. We've got to travel, both in her job and just because we did travel. And we bought an RV. My God, we've had RVs. Well, we don't have them anymore, but we had them for over 3 decades. And at the very end of our retirements, when we retired at the very end of our careers, we sold the house, gave everything away, and moved what we could into a fifth wheel RV and ran around the United States for 3 years. And then we ended up coming to Naples, and we loved it so much, we sold the RV and settled down here. There does come a point where, your age does become a factor, and I don't want to be RVing into my 70s.
We
And
have
here
so
I
much
am.
to yeah, I think you're such a great storyteller, and you actually made my job really easy. You're such a cool guy, and I love the, I love the complexity of you that, I started as a criminal justice major. I wanted to go into, like, homicide, not knowing who I really was at that time, because in college, you think you're a lot tougher than I thought I was a lot tougher than I am. And also RV life is something that I aspire to one day, just for a while. But, thank you for sharing all of that. That is so beautifully told, and I will say, the other day, I talked to this young kid, told him what I do, and he's like, they're two kids, and as I say kids, they're like 20, and one of them's
Yeah,
like, "So is the afterlife real?" And I said, "Hey, I'm not telling you what to believe, but I believe 110% it's real." And they're like, "Really?" And the other guy's like, "But it's just DMT in your brain. Like, it's just DMT causing you to hallucinate." And I said, people believe that, and I would have thought that too, probably because I'm a very logical person. I said, however, after being in this world, talking to researchers, reading books, ex uh, interviewing so many people, being a medium myself, and having these experiences firsthand that prove that I am communicating with some other dimension, people, spirits and other dimensions, I said, I'm not trying to convert you, but I will say the thing is, this happened in 1972. You still remember every detail like it was yesterday. And that's one of the defining characteristics of NDEs, is that they're like, no, it was like the most vivid experience. It wasn't a dream. It was a
right.
tangible place that I was in, and it was realer than this reality.
Exactly. More real than this. That's the
Yeah.
best way to put it, because it's the truth. And I'm like you. So early on, I didn't, my family and very close friends knew about it, but I didn't put it out there because I was concerned. I was in the Air Force.
Yeah.
I didn't want people going, he's crazy. I was a cop. At a certain point I think it was when I became a lieutenant, I can't quite remember, but the internet was fairly new, and I believe YouTube had been invented, because this must have been how I put it out there. I was recording a song. I remember the song actually. It was a Beatles song called "Rain," just in front of my phone or iPad, whatever I had at the time. Would have been a tablet, I think. And I said, well, maybe I'll make a video on what happened to me, and just throw it out on YouTube. And what happened over the years is different people would contact me and say, I'm very interested in putting this on my site. Do you mind? And I would say, no, that's fine. Do it. And so that video from, oh God, how many years was it? It must have been, I'm going to guess it was the early 2000s. I really can't remember. It's out there somewhere still on a couple different sites. And then following that, people began, as the internet grew and all this, people began to contact me and say, would you come on the show like you're doing here? And yeah, absolutely. I'm not in this for the money. I've been taken care of. I've been blessed. I've got a pension. And my wife, we did very well for ourselves. And so all I really care about is that the story gets told. And I know it's helped people. I know it. And it's not Wayne helping them. It's really the spirit, God, through creation. Because I mean, it sounds cliche-ish, but I'm just the carrier. I just am
Mhm.
passing on what I know to be true. By the way, I admire people of faith, because I don't feel like I could have been strong enough to have faith. I think I would have been the doubter, because I was pretty much an atheist when this happened to me.
Mhm.
And the fact that people have faith and didn't have it spoon fed to them like I did. So for me, it's a no brainer. I know that there's another life. I can't tell you the particulars. I don't really have. If I had that information, I probably did. I don't really have it now. Like I can't say, well, we're reincarnated or we're not reincarnated, or we go to a place called heaven. To me, and this gets into my feeling, this isn't something I was shown or that I remember anyway. To me, though, it's all about the force of God, of creation, going through this world and all worlds. And there's many other worlds. I know that because I was shown some of them. So I know that to be the case. And I can understand how somebody who's never had any of these experiences would be skeptical, to say the least. I'm sure I would have been one. I would have said, "Oh, he's nuts," but I'm
Yeah.
not nuts. I know what happened to me, and it transformed my life. First, very slowly, and then more and more. It was always at the center of my being from the age of 17 on. I became a little egotistical, and I don't say that in any judgment because I understand who the 25-year-old was, the
Mhm.
35-year-old. I understand the pressures of the world, family, jobs, and so I don't have a problem with that guy. But I am grateful that at some point, probably in my 50s, I began to realize that I was too ego attached. And I'm not a person who likes to get into this whole the ego is bad uh, or any of that. The ego, it's a system we use here. How could we not? How could we survive in the world without an ego? We couldn't. I recognize that we need to have it, but I've also come to recognize that I don't need to be a slave to the ego. The ego can work with spirit in my life. So my goal has been for a long time and remains to merge the two together.
That is well said and really like self-aware. And I agree with that so much because if we're too in the spirit world, then we're not really doing what we're here to do. And so, and I have been guilty of spiritual bypassing to some degree, and I catch myself because we're supposed to have these experiences. And Lord knows I'm writing a book about mine for people to help people to heal their low self-esteem. I'm a sex and love addict, long time in recovery, and I mean, I'm unrecognizable now, but I needed to have those experiences of doing things that were so out of integrity, that were not acting from my highest and best good or anyone else's. And but that's why we're here, because I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be able to appreciate the lessons. And it doesn't mean that I think it was Angela Harris who I just interviewed, and she said that it doesn't mean like we can't just ignore what's happening here because here is real. And
Yeah,
there's a lot, as you said, you saw it, war. I mean, just we aren't, as a human race, I don't know the percentage, but so many people don't understand what you learned. And we're stuck, they're stuck, people are stuck in fear. They've been indoctrinated, they've been traumatized.
yes,
And that's when we go to war. And there's this lack of
yes,
understanding. I keep just thinking if all of these people that are hurting these other people and viciously hurting them, um, like for pleasure. You know, war used to be shoot them, get it, eliminate them, get it done. And
yeah,
now there's this added element of we want to watch you suffer. And I was like, I just
uh-huh.
keep thinking about this. Like, if the people and these people who are doing the damage, I know the reason they can do it is because as little children, they were shut down your feelings. We are not, this is
Yeah,
our mission in life. So they have desensitized themselves from their humanity. And I just keep praying that they will have near death experiences more and more. And they'll probably be too afraid to share with the
yeah.
leaders. But I think if, God, if every one of them could just come and say, guys, this is not, we're not doing the right, this isn't right. I just wish that. And I don't wish everyone to have a near death experience, as I know it's
Well,
not
you know,
easy.
everyone will have a near-death
Yes.
experience or a death experience. That's
Yes.
going to happen. Nobody
Yeah.
could argue, even if they don't believe in God or do believe in God, they are going to die. That's a given.
Yeah.
This body cannot sustain itself forever. We know this. So when that happens, I I am glad that they will be able to go to wherever they need to go. You know, I don't know what that
Yes.
is. I'm not going to, you know, tell somebody where they might end up. I know what I want to do. I want to
Yeah.
advance my spirit. That's
Mhm.
my goal. I do it every day. And as you alluded to, I'm completely on board. One foot has to be here in my life with my family, my friends, functioning here, and another foot has to be for me in the real world, or the whatever you want to call that place, the place I was at, the place I'm probably at even now. I just don't really realize it, but that could sound a little weird, but I'm here though, and I don't want to leave my family behind. So, early on, when I think there might have been a little concern that I had this death wish, I don't.
Mhm.
I do not. I wish to live as long as I can here on earth and do all the good I can do here on earth. And then from there, it's the next step, and that's true of all of us.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. You talked about too seeing that there are other life forms. Tomorrow I am going to Sedona. There's a man there that has a his backyard is sort of a vortex where um, extraterrestrial beings, their crafts are attracted to that particular location. So we're going out with night goggles to watch them and summon them. And he said, I really need spiritual people because when we're spiritual, we call them in more strongly. So I'm a medium, he's a medium. And he's like, bring whoever you can that has this energy. And like you, before this happened, I would have been like, that is nuts. You're crazy. That's just government stuff flying around. I saw a UFO when I was a kid, and I still was like, it's probably a government thing. Totally wrote it off as government craft, even though it made zero sound at all. And this was in the 80s. How does something fly without a motor or like without an engine? I would love to hear just your thoughts in general about that. I'm now understanding that there are all these different dimensions and these different sort of not just planets, but like dimensions and worlds and different types of beings, and that it really isn't that strange when you consider the complexity of the universe itself. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about that kind of thing.
Well, what would be strange and arrogant is to think that we created ourselves and we are all there is.
Yeah,
That
totally.
would be so bizarrely arrogant and presumptuous. I I can't imagine the myriad of life forms that must exist, beyond mathematical numbers. Because, if you look at it from a scientific perspective, even people like Einstein said the universe really can't be real. Space and time can't be real. It's going to go out and it's going to fold in back on itself. So, one way I look at it, and I don't know if I'm correct, but I think of that thought that it can sound fearful to people that the universe is expanding, but can't infinitely expand and will have to return and implode upon itself. But I think of that as probably a burst of creation, a burst. I don't think it's the only burst of creation. I think there are probably so many that our human minds just can't even begin to conceive of. Even people as brilliant as Hawking or Einstein, even they couldn't quite come to terms with it. And those are brilliant minds. I'm not a scientific guy at all, but I admire science. I understand what it's trying to do and is doing, and there's a lot of benefit from it. But there's also a danger that if you start thinking you, meaning as a human, are creating this and you've done this, then you're probably losing touch with the essential component, which is making contact with other humans. Because all of the science in the world will do no good if we don't return it all to humanity.
Yes. That's so good. That's so good. Yeah, I would love to know too. I know that, of course, you still were a human after your experience, and you still said you kind of did get, look, our 20s get out of town. I was just a mess and totally living in fear, anxiety, drinking, doing drugs, like all the things, and really just, figuring it all out. And that's okay. I've had to learn to forgive myself for a lot of it, but that's thank God for 12-step recovery. There's
Good for
a
you.
yeah, thank you. And how did that change your way of moving through the world? Despite obviously we get caught up in the ego and in the 3D world, but what were some things that really changed for you based on this new perspective you had that this isn't all there is?
I don't know why I became so self-confident. Maybe I always had it. My mother, I owe a deep debt to her because she struggled hard in life. She was a war bride, World War II, and it was just not a good situation with my father leaving us, and it all fell apart. And she did a great job. And I've been critical of her, looking back, going, she was too rigid. She was too demanding. She wasn't this. She wasn't that. But as I look back on it from this perspective, I go, wow, I couldn't have been anything that I was. I couldn't have had the resilience. You talked about being in school and thinking, well, you thought you could be tough enough to be a homicide detective or something like that.
And
Well,
I
I
need
had the
10 hours of
opposite
sleep a
experience.
night.
I thought I was a weak person. I thought I was a very weak person, and I found out I wasn't at all. I was very strong. And then if you go into policing, you have to sort of inure yourself from reality sometimes. And unfortunately for some of us, and that included me, it no longer does. You would you could sound very cavalier about people's misfortunes. And I understood I was doing that. But again, I'm not going to judge the guy who was 28 or 32. He had a lot to learn. He learned it. I know he did because I'm him. And it made me self-confident because if you know that you're never going to die, and I do know that, I don't have faith, I have knowledge. They're two different things. And I do have faith that it's going to work out, but I have the knowledge that it exists. And that's just, I mean, how could I even
Mm.
begin to count that blessing? Because people like yourself who are, reaching out in different ways, I mean, I admire that so much because I was shown it. I was literally taken as a kid and said, here's the secret of life, literally.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I know that people say, don't envy me. You don't want a near-death experience. It can be traumatic, both the way that you cross over, which in your case you don't even remember, but even
Oh,
just
I
trying
hear.
to acclimate back into this world. It sounds like you did obviously I know you're you're only sort of going through this in I can't find the words right now, but obviously there's a lot more to it. But did you find any difficulty in acclimating back to this reality?
No, and I've wondered about that when I see near-death experiences of
Yeah.
people who are 50, 40, they've had lives, and then maybe in some cases, I'm sure you've seen this, devout atheists who have no choice but to understand that, they were wrong.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just like an early gift that guided my life. So it was very different in comparison to a lot of people that I see have NDEs. Even if they were 25, that was quite a few more years than I had under my belt when it happened to me. And again, when it happened, there was no context. So I knew, and I had to carry it forward. And now look what's happening. I mean, how many do you think have been documented? God,
Oh
we must
yeah.
be in the millions now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
And-
between the conferences and the internet and podcasts, and I get it. If people want to say to me, well, it was what did you say the drug was?
DMT.
DMT. So if they want to say that, I don't care. Fine, it was
Yeah.
DMT. It really didn't matter how or what happened. What mattered to me then, and matters more than it ever did, is that it was a vital component of my existence. That was the most important thing in my life by far. And we're forced into these situations sometimes uh, by events that we would prefer not to have happen. That isn't what happened with me, but I know a lot of NDEers, as you were referring to, have I knew one man. Well, I don't know him, but I believe his name might have been Olson. He was in a car crash and he killed most of his family.
Oh
And
yeah.
you might Jeff Olson. Does that sound right? I might have the name
I
wrong.
forget his name, but I know exactly who you're
But
talking
like I
about.
remember watching that wide-eyed and going, "Oh, I had it so easy," in being shown.
Yes.
My oldest daughter, Jennifer, is she was a widow in her 30s because her husband developed cancer. She had two children, and she still does. They're just grown now, and she she would like to write a book called "The Blessings of Cancer." Believe it or not,
Mm.
because she said without that happening, and it was terrible, terrible
Oh God,
experience for
yeah.
us. We loved her husband so deeply, but without having that happen, she said I could never have been catapulted into this spiritual realm that I'm in. And
Yeah.
and she's just like me and you. She's not perfect. She has all kinds of issues and stuff. She's 6, 7 years in a recovered alcoholic, doing wonderful, helping people.
Good.
You know, so she had a tough life. We all have tough lives. We do. Even those of us who are rich and wealthy, and there's so many down here in Naples, I see the torment so often in their faces, in the way they talk to me, the way they are disrespectful to me. And the big difference for me now is because of age and my experiences, my ego doesn't become involved in it. So if somebody talks poorly to me, I understand 100% that it's not about me. I really do.
Yeah.
I understand it's about them. And so I do the best I can to wish them well, and hope that they can get through it.
Yeah, that's one thing that spirituality has helped me with too. I'm very sensitive, and I do feel very deeply. And so when someone lashes out at me, I used to take it as uh, a personal affront. And my mom said something really beautiful to me once. Yeah, that she said, just because someone's mad at you, it doesn't make them right, or it doesn't make you wrong, however you want to word that. And I'm feeling that more and more, that now it still hurts me. I'll
Yeah.
still spend a day sobbing my face off. I'll
Yeah.
still ruminate about it for a few days, but I also understand it's not about me. I had to cut out some of my oldest best friends recently because they lashed out at me because they were drinking and just said things that were mean and nasty. And I was like, this person's an alcoholic and they need help. And this isn't about me. This is about their own trauma. And I literally
Yeah.
had no problem just saying, with love, I cut you off, and I am
True.
blocking you from me so that you don't have access to my energy field, but I totally love you. And
Yeah.
it's not that I hate you. It is all love, and it is because I want you well, and I just can't afford that in my life anymore. But it is that understanding of they were put into my life to be a reflection back to me. And so I'm
Yes.
noticing I always look at now, this was a soul contract choice. This is why I had to be hurt by your actions so that I could look at my own wounds
Yeah.
that need healing, and I'm not angry with you, I just don't wanna be around that.
Right. And you'll be around if they would like to
Yes,
be around as a
100%.
present, not addicted behavior or whatever
Yeah,
it is. It doesn't have to be addiction. It could be anger. It could be so
yep,
many things. And it's hard. I said to my wife one time, I said, "Do you know anybody in all of your life who wasn't tormented in some way?" And
mhm,
we couldn't think of anyone. Anyone.
yeah,
Our grandkids, everybody has demons and torments, and sometimes you don't even you're never aware of them. And I was guilty of that when I was younger. That I was not sensitive enough. I would shut people out. I think some
mhm,
of it, when I look back on it now, was probably a coping mechanism. I was trying to do the best I could for me and my family, and I
yes,
felt but I no longer feel that. So a lot of the memories from policing, well, they can be disturbing now when I think of people ending their lives or someone ending their lives that I've seen. And I was in a place that wasn't, a big city. But if you're a cop long enough, you're going to see things that, they're not good.
yeah,
There's no, you talked about being interested in criminal justice when you were young. I'll just say this. I wasn't. It went the other way and I became one, and I'm grateful for it. But it doesn't make you a better person to see tragedy. It
yeah,
simply does not. But it might be that if you see enough tragedy, you understand that everybody has all sorts of torments. And some of these people, they act out, and unfortunately, somebody just killed somebody here in Naples. And when I heard the story, I go, how is it possible this kid kills a father of four over nothing?
mm, yeah,
And there's all this madness that's associated with this world, the ego system, just they don't understand that it's bigger than them, that it's bigger than us, that it's all part of one thing. They're going to get there. It's just going
Yeah.
to take some
It's gonna
people
be a hard way to learn.
hard lessons. Some of them, I've heard of so many people in prison who actually become very aware of things they couldn't have if they didn't go to prison, and they faced, themselves. I'm not saying everyone who goes to prison does that, but I've heard of many people who do that.
Yeah, me too. I actually have a close friend who went to prison because she was addicted to her Adderall, and she forged
Yeah.
prescriptions, so she wasn't like a hardened criminal, but she actually had to
No.
go to prison for a
Yeah.
year, and now she is religious, Jesus follower, successful. She now works for, um, an organization that when they intake people that are arrested, she talks to them and tries to encourage them, "You don't wanna go to prison, man. Go to rehab." Like, and, it doesn't
Yeah.
always work, but it's like she loves sitting with someone who's all strung out, on meth or crack and saying, "Believe me, there's hope, and I'm proof of that." And
Yeah.
so, again, she only had to do a year, but still, I mean, just
Still.
that you look at her, you're like, "You were in prison?" But yeah, I mean, she came from an abusive mother, a narcissistic
Yeah.
borderline mother, and
Yeah.
that will affect how you go through the world, but fortunately, some
Absolutely.
people do heal, and she had a vision of Jesus and God, and that's her path of how she healed through her own spirituality, so there's always hope, and I just appreciate you being here
Always.
because that's the message that I really find important, is to let people know that when people say you're not alone, it's not just a trite
Right.
minimizing thing. It's like literally you are not alone, even if you are sitting by yourself and you don't
Never.
have family. There's
You
even if
may you may
yeah,
be alone, but you're never alone. You're right.
exactly. And I just want to wrap up by sharing that you do have a website and you described it as a blog. I think it's a blog kind of
It's
format.
yeah, I do short
Yeah.
videos. I do one a week,
Videos.
and
Okay.
it's
Yeah,
called
yeah.
it's a YouTube channel called The Wisdom Years, Wayne Morrison, and I have one other that I use on TikTok, also called The Wisdom
Ooh,
Years, Wayne Morrison.
I'm
So
gonna
those are
follow you
really the
there.
only two I use. I may branch out a little down the road, but only if I think it's the right thing to do. And these days, I'm apt more to listen to something in the background than make my own decisions.
Yeah, thank
And
you so Wayne, you are just a beautiful human, and I'm so glad that we got to connect this way. So I just want to thank you from
oh,
the
thank
bottom
you
of
for the
my heart.
opportunity.
Yeah, this is great. I'm really excited to share this with people, and I just loved this conversation. So look forward to keeping in touch with you and hopefully seeing you at the IANS conference next year in Chicago.
I had never have been to Chicago, so there could be a reason to
Let's
go.
go. We're doing it. All right. Thank you so much, Wayne
Thanks
Morrison.
a lot.
Appreciate you. Bye
I
bye.
appreciate it. Bye.